Alrighty, it has been a moment since we have sat in the hot seat and actually talked about cosplay. And that's because sometimes cosplaying is really hot and hard to do. Hi everyone, I'm Celeste and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is not a sponsored post, but I am really excited for this costume because when I first saw it, I was like, wow, that's a really cool red dress. I might be able to use that red dress some other time. Oh, that's Harley Quinn's cosplay. Huh. A new Harley Quinn cosplay. Huh. A new Harley Quinn cosplay. Huh. A new Harley Quinn cosplay. Huh. If you're new here to my channel, welcome. Hi, I'm CelesteOrchid. I'm actually not Harley Quinn, believe it or not. I'm also not Harley Quinn from Suicide Squad 2, but I'm just dressed like her. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create this entire dress. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in a comment down below. If you want to know how I made my hair, it's kind of ridiculous. I actually used lipstick. I hope it comes out, and I'll let you know in the comments later after I shower and when I'm done with this video. Also, I used a lot of fabric into this outfit. I actually have two different versions of this costume. I have this version where she's in the full dress, and I also have this version with the ripped up skirt, which the ripped up skirt is basically all my scrap fabric in all of it. I used 3 meters of red fabric, and this is all that's left. I also used over 200 yards of tulle, and all of these got sacrificed to the cosplay gods. So now I have tons and tons of these. Tons. I don't really know how else. And I mean tons of these spools for tulle. But it's really easy. Red tulle specifically. And guess what? I used all of them. So it's pretty exciting, yeah. So if you're new here, welcome, and I hope you guys are ready for this really red, crazy, and fun adventure. Yeah. So let's go ahead and get into it. Tutorial time! For Harley Quinn's Suicide Squad 2, I'm going to be using this red garbardine fabric, and it's bright, fiery red. This is going to change later with the tulle. Oh, and this is my pattern that I'm going to be using. I self-drafted this. It's a sweetheart neckline with a low back. This here is some of my tulle that I'm going to be using, and it is 100 yards of red tulle. Very nice and bright, vibrant, just like the fabric that I have chose. One of the main reasons why I wanted it already pre-cut is because I did not want to have to cut this myself. It's so much easier, especially since we're going to be using it for the skirt ruffles. I'm going to start my Harley Quinn cosplay by placing my pattern onto the fabric and following the instructions that I had made. Now it says on fold, but the truth is that's not going to matter because it's going to be covered by the tulle. Once everything was completely pinned down, I went ahead and cut it out. You'll see that I'm using my rotary cutter. It's just faster than scissors. I've learned this and I love it. But even I cannot resist the sweet temptation of the ASMR when cutting with scissors. So that's what I'm going to be doing, cutting with scissors. I'm going to take all of my pieces and bring it to the sewing machine and sew them together. Ta-da! And this is what the top looks like all sewn together. And currently there is no lining. So I'm going to have to copy the bodice pattern again. My back wasn't as low as I wanted it to be, so I went back and started drafting onto the bodice piece and I started making my adjustments. I made sure to make the back even lower and then cut the sweetheart even more in the front. To do this, I made sure to line up all my seams at the top and the sides, making sure that none of it was uneven. Once I got everything in place that I liked, I made sure to pin it down so none of the fabric shifted, and then I cut it out. The outer shell of Harley Quinn's costume actually has a little bit of sparkle, so in order to add that sparkle to my costume, I'm going to be adding these red sequins. So it's time for me to bust out some glue and start gluing this all over the top. Now, you don't need to make this symmetrical, you just need to have fun and a little bit of imagination and start gluing everywhere. I'm going to be using my contact cement, or if you have something similar like E6000, you can slowly start giving little dollops of glue all around the top and placing your sequins in those glue. Make sure to let it fully dry before moving on to your next step. My glue is actually really corrosive and it started taking off my nail polish. Make sure that you're safe and you're not doing this on top of your cutting mat because it actually started taking off the paint on there too. This is what my finished sequins looks like. I didn't go too crazy on it because I still need some of the sequins for the skirt. Before I continue with the top, I want to make sure that I'm going to shake off any of the loose sequins and try to stick them back down if they are loose. One of the biggest problems that I had with Harley Quinn's costume for Suicide Squad 2 is that I didn't know what the bodice looked like. I researched this like crazy, and I only understood what this top was meant to look like when I saw the toy. The toy shows that there's a clear 2 different panels overlapping each other. One of the sides actually ruffles and the other side just goes underneath the other side. So I'm going to emulate this look with the layers of tulle that I have, but if I had one flat sheet, it would have been so much easier for me to have draped it and then just created the folds instead of having to cut several small layers of tulle to create this effect. Because I have strips of tulle, I'm going to make sure that I pin everything in place so that way it does not shift around, and I'm going to make sure that I sew it down before I sew it to the lining. So once I have one side of tulle completely down, I'm going to go ahead and stitch it in place, making sure that it does not go anywhere and it's easier for me to sew with. One of the things that is super important is that you did not glue sequins close to the top or to the bottom so you can sew down your tulle or your lining to your top. Once I've sewn down all the tulle that I've marked before, I'm going to start pinning down tulle on the other side to overlap that side, which means left side is going to be longer than the right side and it's going to overlap the right side. So I know it looks kind of crazy, but trust me, it'll be fine. Make sure your left goes over your right. I already went out and created my lining pieces, which is exactly the same as the bodice, and I'm still using the same red garbardine, and I made sure to save the cuts from my earlier draft, and I pinned it to it and I cut it out, so it's exactly the same. I'm going to go ahead and pin all those pieces together and making sure that they line up properly. Now I'm just going to sew the lining to the top and make sure that I have enough space to flip it inside out. Now with them being joined together, I'm going to go ahead and clip the curves. Clipping the curves will let the seam lie perfectly flat and give more allowance for it to stretch. Now before I completely flip it inside out, I'm going to do something called understitching. I've talked about this a bit on my channel, but understitching is a technique where you sew the seam allowance to the lining, making sure that it does not pop out onto the base fabric. My understitching is kind of hard to see because I used red fabric and red thread, so if you were using a contrasting color, you'd be able to see it more clearly. If you have any questions about this, let me know in the comments down below. Before I go any further, I'm going to work on the bottom of the dress. So to begin the skirt, I'm going to be using this pattern 4016 because it has the skirt shape that I want, and it's right there in front of me because I'm using it for another cosplay. So what I'm going to do is line up the waist measurement all the way at the top, or I'm just going to cut out from that point and create the skirt. The skirt actually has like this teardrop up and down kind of like umbrella shape. I don't want that to happen, so instead I'm going to cut across that. This just assures that the hemline is going to be straight. It might not be even at first, but that's why we're going to go back and take a look at it. I made sure to pin everything down and I marked out how long I want the skirt to be, and then I cut it out. Now I take those individual pieces and pin them together so I can take them to the sewing machine. And now I sew the skirt together. For these seams, I didn't really finish them properly because I was going to cover them with tulle and it was just going to go crazy. So what I did do was I folded it to a side and I sewed on top of it, just top stitching it, making sure that the seam would not come undone and reinforcing it. This is sort of like flat felting, but it's not because the seam is still exposed. Because I modified my pattern, this hemline is very different. So instead of leaving it hanging weird, I'm going to go ahead and clean up that hemline. For the bottom hem of the skirt, I just did a rolled hem. Now with the base of the skirt created, it's time to add the tulle. This is why I wanted it in pre-cut strips. Take the tulle and place it about 1 inch, which is around 3 centimeters, hanging over the hemline. This is where we want to start our ruffles. Take it to the sewing machine and start gathering the tulle into a straight line across the bottom hem. Take your time with the bottom hemline to make sure that it's even and not to stab yourself with the sewing machine. This process is going to take a long time, so put on an audiobook or start listening to your favorite podcast to get comfy. Once I reach the edge of the skirt, I cut off the tulle from the roll. Now it's time to finish the rest of the skirt. Do the same thing that you did with the bottom hem, but treat the last row of tulle as your new line. Layer the new layer about 1 inch overlapping to start gathering and sewing. Repeat these steps to fill up the entire length of the dress. Here's hoping you bought enough tulle. Okay, so here's the problem. I thought this measly 1 roll of tulle was going to be enough. No, so I went ahead. I bought so many more rolls of tulle. It's like Pokemon. You gotta catch all the color you like. Yay. So that's what happened. We're gonna be throwing this back into the skirt and see how it works. Yeah. And a few hours later, I'm already done with the first roll.
6.5 hours later.
Look at all the rolls of tulle that I needed to cover the entire skirt. So there's a little bit left at the top here, and what I'm going to do is split the difference. So I'm going to use the middle of the tulle, or try to, and sew down a line across it, and then I'm going to sew the other part to go on top, leaving it down, making a clean single line of tulle on top. Look at all of this massive tulle pool on my table. It's insane. And trust me, it did take a long time. So I bet you're wondering why I still have these parts of tulle left over. And that's because I'm going to be making another skirt. Dun dun dun! That's right! I'm going to be making the skirt that she rips underneath that skirt. But we're gonna start the other skirt now. Woo! So I don't have that much red fabric left to create the skirt. I want to practice a bit more sustainability when cosplaying, so I'm going to try to use the rest of my scraps to finish this Harley Quinn cosplay. I'm going to sew my scraps together to create a larger piece so I can make a ripped skirt look. I'm lucky that I won't have to hem the skirt at all, so the more shredding, the better. I'm going to take advantage of the largest piece possible and start cutting my previous pattern pieces there. I decided that the biggest piece of fabric that I have should actually have all the pieces first, so they're in one nice big piece, and then the longer parts that need to be longer, I'll just add the rest of the scraps, kind of like these pieces and these pieces, because they're already kind of scrappy-like, and I think that would be good that the hemline is already jaggedy. So what I'm going to do is grab my rotary cutter and go ahead and cut this out. So this is what my skirt pieces look like right now. I'm going to pin them together and then continue adding some scraps of fabric to create the length that I need on one side. So for the main part of the skirt, I'm going to fold over the seams and just top stitch them down like I did on the larger skirt. Now I'm going to start adding the scraps of fabric to the skirt I made. Of course you can go out and buy more fabric so it sits properly, but since the skirt is going to be covered by tulle, I don't really care, and I'm going to make use of all the fabric I've already bought. Now pin that shredded skirt base to your top. We're going to go ahead and just line these up together at the sides and the middle points and the center point and pin them together, and then making sure it all fits properly. Then take it to the sewing machine and sew it all together. Then comes the next dreaded part of adding all the tulle back to it, but this time we're going to be starting at the top seam. Once you finish the first roll of tulle, slightly press it downwards to find a new point in starting your next row. You want to make sure that this goes underneath the first row of tulle, kind of like the first skirt. Instead of going on top, we're going underneath. It's okay if this isn't perfect, you just don't want to have any bald spots. In the references, it actually shows that some of these pieces aren't perfectly straight. Continue covering the entire ripped skirt with tulle pieces, and feel free to leave some of the tulle pieces hanging to create more of a ripped effect. Once I've finished with all of the tulle on the skirt and with all of the layers, I'm going to go ahead and sew in a red zipper. After installing the zipper, I sewed the rest of the skirt closed. With the dress near completion, it's time to add the halter strap. I'm using leftover Christmas ribbon. It's completely the right shade and width I need for this, so don't at me. I'm pinning one side of the ribbon on the bodice and then bringing the rest around my neck to the other point of the bodice. I'll mark it with a pin knowing that's how much ribbon I'll need to create the halter strap. Before attaching the ribbons or anything else, I'm going to make sure to seal the edges of the ribbon so it doesn't fray by setting it on fire. Okay, I'm just using a lighter and burning it. Either way, that's what's going on. I try my dress back on and then I make sure everything still fits properly and I hand sew it with a needle and thread. Using some more Christmas ribbon, I'm going to attach it at the very base where the halter starts, and then I'm going to cut a little piece off so it can go to my arm. Make sure to cut 2 of these because you have 2 arms. Harley Quinn has these little ties on her arm, and that's what we're making right now, and with the extra Christmas ribbon. So make sure you have a little bit of tulle left over and not sew it all into the dress to make these armbands. My tulle is a little bit thin, and so I doubled up and made sure that I had enough straps to make sure it was really nice and thick and saturated with color before I sewed it to the band that's going to the halter top. I'm going to find the middle of the tulle and sew it to this little arm strap. After so many hours of looking at this outfit, I decided I'm going to use contact cement to add the arm straps to the halter top. It actually goes above the bodice on the actual halter strap, not on the dress. The halter strap is part of the dress, so yeah, it's all there. I'm using sewing clips to keep it in place so it doesn't shift around and it glues properly. Okay, so we're here. And we need to take out the blonde. No, we need to put the blonde back in. So I have one of these lightning kits. That's a lot. I have 2 of the lightning kits. So I'm gonna do one for one day and then I'm gonna let it relax and then I'm gonna go in again. Let's go ahead and get started. Completely put inside a shower cap. It's a little wet. Unfortunately, I had to try it, but let's see how this goes. And don't forget, I have a second blonde box, and this is 9 levels lift. I honestly don't think I should use it again, unless it's at the roots. I have an hour, sort of, and let's see what happens. With this newfound time, I realized that the rest of my skirts don't have very shiny bits on it. So I got some more contact glue and my table and my skirts, and I'm going to be gluing on tons and tons of sequins on it. You can see right now there's no sequins. It's just tulle, tons of tulle. So I'm going to change that. I totally forgot that I didn't close the outer skirt, and originally I was going to use Velcro. Instead, I decided to use snaps so it'll close, but it can rip it off and the tulle won't get in the way. For the sequins, I placed a lot of glue dots everywhere and followed it up by placing sequins on it. I only placed the sequins underneath the tulle, not on top of it. Okay, so it was my first time doing it by myself, just doing my roots, and it is patchier than a quilt that I'm making. There's a little bit of parts that are actually black still, especially this bottom part. So if I just, okay, you can't see, but there's this spot at the bottom of my neck that's completely black. Actually, I think you say it right there. And I'm like, whoops, I guess I missed that. Good thing I bought 2 boxes of dye. It's still not light enough to the way that I want it, but that's why I have people like my husband and BB to help me out. But I think I'm just gonna see who's available and if y'all like, fix it! Okay, so let's go ahead and do that, and then I'll just show you how I look when I start to get into the costume. you cough without covering your mouth, you die. So I hope you enjoyed this little journey of my Harley Quinn cosplay. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in a comment down below. Did you actually watch Suicide Squad 2? Are you excited for it? Are there any new characters that you actually love and know about? Leave those in the comments if you're not going to ask me any questions. Oh, while you're down there, make sure to click that red button down below to subscribe and never miss out on any future cosplay content or any of my other content for that matter. Thank you so much for coming in, and remember to stay inspired, be creative, and I will see you in a future video. Bye!